He awoke with the rising of the sun, that dreaded, terrible sun. The young man sat up slightly, squinting as he looked up from his mat. He felt weak and tired, and so very thirsty. The floor was hard and cold, and the cell bars that surrounded him only made him feel more alone. That barred window that revealed the rising of the sun glared back at him, taunting him with that terrible sight of daylight. He wanted it to go down, not to rise. He wanted the sun to just stay away. Let the day not come this time. The young man crawled up, trying to rise to his feet as if to cover the window and let the old man next to him sleep. "Don't waste your time, lad," the old man whispered hoarsely. "I'm awake. I've been for a while yet." The young man frowned and sat back down. "You need sleep, old man?" "Nay." The old man chuckled with a throaty cough. His white graying hair fell down just beyond his neck and his beard, unshaved but still regal, framing his cheeks and chin. He had a weary face, lines evident on bags under his eyes. His deep blue eyes were the same as the young man's, though they were not related. He'd only met this man a few weeks ago when he'd been brought here to Castle Carlisle. The old man coughed again, and the younger reached forward as if to help him, though the old man waved him off. "Nay," he said again. "I don't need sleep. I want to watch the sunrise." The young man sat in silence. "I wish it wouldn't," the young man harassed. "Aye, but it does whether we want it or not," the young man croaked, never pulling his eyes away from the glowing dawn, drawing closer and closer, the sky glowing an orange color. The young man looked at the old, the light reflecting in his eyes. They held so much more life than his face seemed to suggest. "Or could all things be so fixed?" "Talking in riddles again?" the young man asked with an edge of good humor. "When you get to be my age, it becomes something of a habit," the young man winked. The young man chuckled and sat in silence for a while. "Why, lad," the young man whispered, "did I ever tell you of Loch Lomond?" He had. The old man had told him many times since he'd been thrown in here with him. He knew more about Loch Lomond than he ever cared to remember now, thanks to this old man, and yet he wanted to hear it again. He had to hear it again. "Nay, can't say I have," the young man answered. The old man's eyes twinkled and shimmered as if with tears. "'Tis a loch you could never forget, lad. You go beyond the bracts and come to the banks at this hour. You'll see the sun shining bright on the surface of the water. Almost spring now, aye? You'll see the flowers blooming and springing up from around the banks like a crown. And the still water. Ah, lad, 'tis like a bed for the sun. You could stare in its wake and get lost forever. The mountains around it sitting to guard her. Aye, and only God himself touch her, lad. Only God's got the right. The water, lad, cool to the touch, and simple too, but each drop more precious than diamond, more lovely than crystal." He would go on like this for some time. The young man knew that. He had heard the old man lament and go on and on about the lake so often he could probably recite the whole prose by heart. But he knew that the lake isn't what the man was building up to. "And there, lad, there, me and my true love, 'tis where we met. And I want to go again." "Aye, is she a fine lass?" "Finest wench you ever laid eyes on," the old man cackled, the cough cutting off at midstream. "Aye, I was half your age when was coming down the Bin Lomond, and it was just about this time, this hour, and there she was, lad, hair red like fire, face alight with freckle and eyes like plucked from a spring morn." The old man chuckled. "Her hair ain't quite that red now. Age does that, you know." "Aye, but she still has the eyes, right?" "Aye, how'd you know that?" the old man teased, and the young man smiled at him. He'd heard the story before, of course, but he had to let the man tell it again. Tell it again and again if he could. "The last thing that leaves a lass is her eyes, aye?" the young man quoted. The old man nodded knowingly and sighed long and low. "Aye, lad, that they do. And don't you forget it. He smiled weakly and then went back to looking at the sun. We'd hide among the glen, or under the hills, watch the moon rise in the gloaming. We'd chase each other up and down the hills, rolling in the grass, and we laugh, till the sky light up with stars. How long? Aye? How long you do that for? About every day, lad. Had to get old after a while, aye? The young man asked. The old man stared at him a long moment and shook his head. It was heaven, lad. And heaven don't ever age, he whispered. The young man shrugged. Can't say I really understand, old man. You ain't ever known love before? The old man asked. The young man shook his head. When he joined Bonnie Prince Charlie in his attempt to overthrow the English king, he'd not left anyone but his mum behind. He never knew his da, and his mum was in a fine health. He'd never found time to find a bonny lass. The Battle of Culloden Moor had practically put an end to any thoughts of love or romance. When he'd been dragged away from the battlefield and thrown in this putrid cell, his mind was far away from thoughts of romance. Until the third day, when they tossed the old man in with him. He'd been at the battle too, an old veteran. And all that was on his mind, apparently, was his lass at Loch Lomond. At first, the young man had wanted him to stop speaking, to just give all of his rambling a rest. But over time, he'd grown to love hearing the old man talk about his wife back home, about his adventures, his games, his joys, his regrets. And then, the old man paused a moment and turned back to the sun. You'll get your chance, lad. When you get back. The young man frowned and moved closer to the old man. And when I do, I'll take her to Loch Lomond, aye? The young man teased. The old man just turned and looked at him with a soft smile across his face, like an old lion. An old king, weary from rule and smiling at the innocence presented to him. Aye, lad. You do that. You take her to Loch Lomond. As they sat, the sound of iron doors clanking open could be heard. The old man didn't turn his eyes away, but the young man rounded, rising to his feet. 3 men marched into the dungeon and stepped into the cell. They had disdainful looks about them, and they turned their nose up at both prisoners. One opened the cell door and glared at the old man. Let's go. You've an appointment with the gallows. The young man jumped to his feet and started toward the guards, but all 3 raised their weapons fast, blades pointing at him. You've been given your pardon and are due to release in a week. Do not throw away your good fortune by doing something foolish. You'll have him over my dead body, the young man snarled. Nay, lad, calm yourself. You'll have him over my dead body, the young man snarled. Nay, lad, calm yourself, the old man croaked, slowly rising to his feet, showing an unmistakable strength in his body as he stood on firm legs. He turned to face the young man and reached out his withered hands, placing them on the young man's shoulders as his teary eyes found his. I can't leave you. You don't have to die, the young man started to sob. We gotta go home. You gotta get home to Loch Lomond. You gotta see her again, you gotta. Aye, lad. Aye, we're going home, the old man agreed, tears rolling down his face. But you'll take the high road, aye? And I'll take the low. And I'll be in Scotland afore you. He winked, and the young man grit his teeth, fighting in vain to hold back tears. But me and my true love, we'll never meet again. Not on the bonny banks of Loch Lomond. That's enough, the English guard barked. Let's go, now. Oh, have a heart, the young man barked. The old man shook his head and turned away, hobbling towards the guards, his eyes firm but sad. He stood straight and tall like a statue, his body unwavering. I'll see you there, the young man cried to the old man. I'll find you there at the loch. I'll see you on the banks. The old man cast one last look back at the young man, and he smiled wearily. Aye, lad. Don't be late. A year ago to the day, the young man now stands on the banks of the loch he'd never seen but had known so very well. The birds sing on the wind as the water ebbs and flows. The wildflowers dance in the breeze along the bank. The sun on the water rests sleepily as the still surface acts as the bed for it. The young man stares at the water for a long while, the words of the old man speaking to him even now, and as he gazed out at the water, a subtle movement caught his eye. He turned and saw a woman. She was older. Lines on her face told of her age. Her hair, once red, had streaks of gray and orange in its beautiful locks, but when her eyes turned to see him, the young man's breath caught in his throat. The old man had been honest. Her eyes were like pieces of a spring sky staring right back at him. The voice of the old man again sang of her, and the young man felt tears in his eyes as he heard the ballad. With shaking legs, the young man walked towards the bonny woman on the bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond.